Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. Tonight, we're going to be talking about talking boards. Tonight's show is brought to you by the Organic Man Coffee Trike, the best coffee in the planet. Without coffee, the human race would still be crawling around on their hands and knees, picking things out of the dirt to eat. Yes, coffee created the Industrial Revolution. Without coffee, well, life just wouldn't be that good. Get the best coffee in the world by stopping by 4501 McPherson between 6:30 a.m. and 7 p.m. If you're not in Laredo or you just don't want to leave the house, you can get the best coffee by contacting them at organicmancoffeetrike.shop. Sunday, July 16th, 2023, at 2 p.m., I will be speaking at the McAllen Public Library, 4001 North 23rd Street. I'll be telling about a flying disc that crashed in Mexico back in 1948. It is now referred to as the Laredo Incident. The origins of the Ouija board, or the talking board, is a mystery. There's no written account on who actually designed the first boards or when and where they came up with the idea. February 1891, advertisements started appearing in newspapers telling about a wonderful new invention. The papers said Ouija, the wonderful talking board, was something everybody should get their hands on. Those interested should drop by a particular Pittsburgh toy and novelty shop. I couldn't find the name of the store or who invented the board. This board was a link between the known and the unknown, the material and the immaterial. Another advertisement in a New York newspaper declared it interesting and mysterious. They swore this talking board was the real thing, which had been proven at the patent office before it was placed on the market. You could pick up your own talking board for just $1.50. Well, a dollar bill back in 1891 was worth $33.34 today. A talking board would set you back the equivalent of $50. The average laborer made $1.75 a day, working 14 to 16 hours a day. It would take all month to earn enough money to buy a Ouija board. The basic layout on the board was changed very little over the years. Some had all kinds of fancy images scattered among the letters and the numbers. Others were kind of utilitarian. They depended on how much you wanted to spend. The planchette, which is a French word for little plank, was a small heart-shaped flat piece of wood that was equipped with two-wheeled casters and a pencil that was held in place with the point down. It was used to facilitate automatic writing. The use of the planchette to produce written messages coming from the dead or the spirit world. The devices were popular in seances during the Victorian era before their eventual evolution into the simpler non-writing pointing device for the Ouija boards that eclipsed the popularity of their original form. You didn't need to be gifted or a spiritist in order to drive the planchette. You just needed a couple of fingers on each hand. The talking board has the letters of the alphabet arrayed in two semicircles, the numbers 0 through 9, the word yes and no in the uppermost corners. The word goodbye was usually at the bottom of the board to let you know when the spirit had left. The planchette was a teardrop or a heart shaped device, usually with a small window in the body, used to maneuver about the board. Usually with a small window that you could see the letters or the numbers through. The idea was that two or more people would sit around the board, place their fingertips on the planchette, and then pose a question. They would watch the planchette move from letter to letter, spelling out the answer on its own. The old boards were made out of wood, but today they're simply cardboard. People have always been looking for ways to communicate with the spirit world. Every culture has some means of contacting those who have passed away. Margaret and Catherine Fox were born October 7th, 1833, in New Brunswick, Canada. The Fox sisters moved with their family to a farm near Hyattsville, New York, in 1847. Stories began to spread through the community about strange sounds being heard in the Fox house. Margaret and Catherine told people those were the spirits communicating with them. Word quickly spread, and people began to flock to their home to hear and hopefully speak to their loved ones. An older sister, Anna Lee Fish of Rochester, New York, began managing regular public demonstrations of her sister's gifts. The twins moved into her home, and soon what became known as the Rochester Rappings was born. This was a code whereby communication could be made with the spirits by asking the twins questions, which would then be answered with sounds coming from the other world. The New York Tribune endorsed the Fox sisters. This led to their subsequent tours of the country and then the world. Spiritism became a fad. Dozens of imitators, including Victoria Woodhull, began performing as mediums, and a great deal of cultist and pseudo religious crusading sprung up. There was no organized body of spiritualists, and there was no actual technique that had to be used. All you had to do was just sit there and tell people you were communicating with the dead and then kind of make a show of it. So there was very little way of knowing who was the legitimate spiritualists and who were just fakes. Right after the American Civil War, many families of those who had marched off to do their duties had no idea if their fathers, husbands, or sons would ever return. This led to thousands of people contacting mediums, many of whom were just there to make a buck, hoping to find out the fates of their loved ones. There was no way of knowing if what the medium said was true until long after they had moved on to the next town. If they were con artists, there was no way to seek justice. This didn't stop people from looking for answers to questions, though whatever means came to their hand. The Ouija board came straight out of the American 19th century obsession with spiritism, the belief that the dead are able to communicate with the living. If a member of your family had passed on, you might be able to talk to them. If they were still alive, the spirits should know, and they would tell you that your husband, your son, your father would return and when. The makers of the first talking board are said to have actually asked the board what to call it. The name Ouija or Ouija came through, and when they asked, "What does that mean?" the board simply said, "Good luck." Some say the name is a combination of the French word oui, which means yes, and the German word ja, which also means yes. Others say the word was simply made up by the spirit in the board. How it's pronounced is also up for debate. Weha, Weja, Ouija. Even if you mispronounce the name, most folks will know what you're talking about. Or you can just simply call it a talking board. The people making the board were more interested in making money than creating a means of communication. A wooden board was sanded smooth, and then it was painted. Someone with a steady hand printed the letters onto the board. Another worker carved the planchette into their proper shapes. The whole thing was put into a box and then sold. At no time in the process was there some occultist conveying a spirit into the board. No magic was involved. The board is just a flat thing with letters and numbers on it. The Kennard Novelty Company made a few bucks, and they passed on a little to the workers. Not wanting others to steal their new form of income, the Kennard Company had gone to the Washington Patent Office to get a talking board patent. Once at the office, they had to prove that the thing actually worked. The patent officer told the two, in order to prove the Ouija board was a means of communication and not just a fancy board, they would have to answer a question. He asked them to spell his name. Not knowing how his name was spelled, the two sat down at the board. They asked the spirit to spell his name, and it did. It must have worked because the company was issued a patent for their board. Now, I've read the same story, a dozen times on a dozen different sites, and each writer says that this is how it happened. I have a very easy name to spell, 5 letters. I've seen some names that are not only spelled different than the way they're pronounced, but they've got way too many letters. Seeing his name being spelled out by some kind of a magical device shocked the government employee. He was so shocked that he issued the number to the board company. No explanation was given to how the board knew his name or how it was spelled. There was no blueprint submitted showing how this game worked. A flat piece of wood and a heart shaped device that would answer your questions. With the patent in hand, the company went to work putting out as many Ouija boards as they could. By 1892, the Kennard Novelty Company went from one factory in Baltimore to two factories in Baltimore, two factories in New York, two in Chicago, and one in London. By 1893, Kennard and Bond, the two men that owned the company, were making a ton of money. It's funny how the more some people have, the more they want. Internal disputes began to arise. The two began accusing each other of unsavory dealings. Using legal means, other members of the toy company managed to push these two men out. They simply bought them out of the company. A man named Fould, Fuld, who was an employee and he owned stock in the company, wound up as the CEO. In 1898, with the blessings of Colonel Bowie, the majority shareholder and one of the only two remaining original investors, Fuld licensed the exclusive rights to make the board. What followed were boom years for Fuld and frustration for some of the men who had been in on the Ouija board from the beginning. Public squabbling over who'd really invented it played out in the pages of the Baltimore Sun, while their rival companies designed, manufactured, and then tried selling talking boards only to find nobody would buy them. Everyone wanted an original Ouija board. All those other board manufacturers failed, probably because they didn't work. In 1919, Bowie sold the remaining business interest in the Ouija to Fueled for $1 whole. Some people loved using a talking board to get answers to questions. There were a few who hated the things. Not just the religious folks, but the spirit mediums. The people who used to make a healthy income found their clients staying home and getting all their answers from the board instead of crossing somebody's palm with silver. The added savings of only having to pay for the board one time made the price a lot easier to swallow. As time marched on, the talking board's popularity would come and go. When things were going well, the boards were mostly left on the shelves at the stores. Anytime there was uncertainty, like during war, the stores couldn't get enough talking boards to sell to all those wanting them. In late 1910 and early 1920s, a marked increase in sales happened because of the Great War in Europe. People wanted to know who was still alive, and so they turned to the spirits for answers. The factories had to ramp up production to meet the demands. The talking boards became such a normal part of society that in May 1920, Norman Rockwell created a painting showing a man and a woman with a Ouija board balanced between them on their knees. Everyone knew what a Ouija board was, and just about everybody had one. Some folks will say Fooled was the actual inventor of the talking board, but he always said he had nothing to do with the origination of the thing. Talking boards was having input into the running of the company. Fooled used the board to direct overall management decisions. He was told by the board he should build a new factory. In 1927, Fould was up on the roof of his latest factory, the one the board said he should build, when by some weird chance he fell over the side and died. Newspapers gave him credit for the board once he was dead, but this might have been just a way to sell papers. During the Great Depression, the Fould Company opened new factories to meet demand for the boards. Over 5 months in 1944, a single New York department store sold 50,000 Ouija boards. In 1966, the Parker Brothers Company bought the game from Fould Company. The next year, 2 million boards were sold, outselling Monopoly. More American troops were being shipped off to Vietnam, leading to more uncertainty and more people wanting answers. Not all was fun and games. As manufacturing was using cheaper products, such as cardboard and plastic, the prices were going down, leading to more people using the talking boards. This led to some things coming to light that caused worry amongst people. In 1920, National Wire Services reported that would-be crime solvers were turning to Ouija boards for clues in the mysterious deaths of a New York gambler, Joseph Burton Elwin. 1921, the New York Times reported that a Chicago woman was being sent to a psychiatric hospital because she tried to tell the doctors that she wasn't suffering from dementia, but the Ouija spirits had told her to leave her mother's dead body in the living room for 15 days before burying her in the backyard. 1930, newspaper readers heard about two women in Buffalo, New York, who had murdered another woman after being told to do so by a Ouija board. 1941, a 23-year-old gas station attendant from New Jersey told the New York Times that he had joined the army because a Ouija board had told him to. 1958, a Connecticut court decided not to honor a Ouija board will. A Mrs. Helen Dow Peck had died, and she left $1,000 to her two former servants. However, she was also supposed to have left $152,000 to a Mr. John Gale. The spirit board had told that he was supposed to get the money and not the two servants. The court said nay, nay. There were also some folks using Ouija boards to channel spirits in order to write. In 1916, Mrs. Pearl Curran made headlines when she began writing poems and stories that she said were dictated by the Ouija board. It was supposed to have been the spirit of a 17th century Englishwoman named Patience Worth. Curran earned significant success, getting thousands of copies sold, but she never quite got rich doing it. The following year, Curran's friend Emily Grant Hutchings claimed that her book, Jap Heron, was communicated to her from a Ouija board by Mark Twain. 1982, Pulitzer Prize winning poet James Merrill wrote his epic Ouija inspired and dictated poem, The Changing Light at Sandover, which won a National Book Critics Circle Award. Merrill said the Ouija board acted more as a magnifier of his own poetic thoughts rather than a hotline to the spirits. By the early 1970s, Ouija boards were kind of considered more of a game than an actual way of communicating. People were becoming too sophisticated to believe that spirits could inhabit a piece of cardboard. 1973, The Exorcist showed up in theaters, giving people a new thought about playing games. A 12-year-old girl named Reagan, played by Linda Blair, became possessed by a demon after playing a Ouija board. Suddenly, people began to say they had seen or heard things after using the board game. Yes, I saw the movie. It was impressive, but I didn't freak out afterwards. I didn't even lose any sleep at night, unlike my brother, who, when he saw The Exorcist, it kind of freaked him out. He kept seeing shadow beings following him around afterwards. Or at least that's what he said. Well, a lot of folks freaked out after seeing the movie, and a lot of folks began to insist something be done. The religious folks who tend to jump overboard at the least little thing began telling people to not only boycott the movie, but the Ouija board as well. There were screams for the government to do something about it. Too many people run to the government to take care of what should be their own responsibility. If you hate a movie, don't go see it. If you're afraid of a board game, don't use one. I have never used a Ouija board. My neighbor did. He had one and he used it from time to time. He also had a magic 8 ball and a deck of tarot cards. I don't know of any bad things that ever came from his collection. I know how my curiosity would get me in trouble. I would say or do the wrong thing at the right time, and then my life would become interesting. And I don't need interesting. I have told people I will go on a ghost hunt, but the moment somebody mentions the word possession, I ain't going. Don't deal with demons. Ghosts are okay, demons, no. Ouija boards became a tool of the devil because of that movie. People began telling about how they knew someone who killed their entire family after playing with a Ouija board. Horror writers began churning out one scary movie after another, all with the talking boards as a plot twist. Ouija boards were denounced by religious groups as Satan's preferred method of communication. In 2001, in Alamogordo, New Mexico, Ouija boards were being burned in bonfires along with copies of Harry Potter. The more people ranted about tools of the devil, the more talking boards were being sold. The boycott was having the reverse effect. A lot of people were looking into them more out of curiosity than wanting to talk to Satan. How many scary encounters were just brought on by overactive imaginations, and how many were unexplained developments that just might have been connected to the other side? The story about Regan becoming possessed after playing with the Ouija board is based on a true story. The movie only put what might be right there in front of people's faces so they just might use a bit more discretion when they go playing with things. William Peter Blatty, who wrote both the screenplay and the best selling novel, 1971, uh, got his ideas after reading the diary of the priest who was actually there when it happened. In the 1940s, a woman was visiting her sister and her nephew. She brought him a Ouija board and showed the young boy how to use it. They spent some time communicating with the spirit world. In 1949, the aunt died. The young boy missed his favorite aunt and he decided to try contacting her using the Ouija board. He sat in his room alone and he asked the board if he could speak to his aunt. The planchette slid around the board, spelling out words to the effect that he was indeed communicating with his favorite aunt. The boy was thrilled and he went on to tell her how much he missed her and things to that effect. Late one night, the sound of water dripping inside the wall of the bedroom got his as well as his grandmother's attention. The plumber checked, but he could find no leak. In fact, there were no water pipes in the wall. The next few weeks were disturbed by the sounds of scratching coming from inside the same wall. No signs of animals or any of tree branches or anything like that rubbing against the house could be used to explain away these sounds. The boy continued using the Ouija board to talk to his dead aunt a few more times. The sounds inside the walls led to other things happening that began to worry the family. The family began to hear sounds as well, not just inside the walls, but in the house. Strange phenomena began to happen. Things like a Bible rose from the bookshelf and landed at the boy's feet. There was a large stuffed chair in which the boy was sitting. It rose up into the air, flipped over, and dumped him face first onto the floor. The rocking chair that he was sitting in began to spin like a top. Gradually, things grew even weirder. At night, heavy furniture in the boy's room began to move around, and the family could hear him screaming. He was yelling obscenities in his sleep. Talk about Tourette syndrome to the max. A doctor, a psychologist, other experts examined the boy, and they could find nothing wrong. Some point, the family turned to demonic possession as a possible explanation. Since they were Lutheran, they contacted a minister from their denomination in Washington, D.C. for help. The Lutheran priest came to the house and he was going to spend the night keeping an eye on the boy. Halfway through the vigil, the boy began speaking in a voice from beyond the grave. It scared the priest, who tried his best to act as if this was just the boy being, a boy. And when it became obvious that this was not him pretending, the priest told the family that they should contact the Catholic priest because those people understood this kind of thing. Instead, the family moved from one side of the country to the other. They went from Washington, D.C. to Washington State. The weird things followed them and they continued to get worse. When all the normal things were doing no good, it was time to try something unheard of. The family was able to get a hold of the local Catholic church and they pled their case. After talking to the Lutheran priest over the phone, the church sent Reverend E. Albert Hughes from the St. James Catholic Church in Mount Rainier. The priest came to the house and he saw the boy. You don't go straight into an exorcism, no matter what you've heard. The people involved are all questioned. The house is examined. Everything must be ruled out, such as insanity, drug use, possible practical jokes, anything being caused possibly by nature. Reverend Hughes gave the parents some holy water and some blessed candles. This was simply the first step in what might become a long process. Once back at the church, the priest received a phone call saying the bottle of water had exploded and the flames from the candles were reaching up to the ceiling. I have to ask, did the priest say, gee, this is getting exciting, or did he run and call for help immediately? When I was in basic training, some of us, me included, were actually kind of looking forward to going into battle, as crazy as that might sound. You're taught all of these neat things, and you want to be able to use them. Do priests have kind of the same outlook? Being taught to fight evil, and then there's evil waiting for you to make your move. That's why I don't play with Ouija boards. During the conversation, the boy could be heard cussing like a drunk sailor in Latin. The priest was able to translate the words, and this gave him ammunition to go to the archbishop. Things were getting exciting, but not in a good way. The boy was sent to stay at the Georgetown University Hospital, where steps would be taken to remove the evil spirit possessing him. Reverend Hughes did his best, but he didn't have the experience or the knack for removing demons. This is not just something you want to try without a whole lot of training and a very strong faith. The boy managed to pry a spring loose from the bed and he used it like a weapon. Reverend Hughes wound up with a slice to his arm. The exorcism wasn't going to work in the university hospital, so the boy was sent to St. Louis and placed in a Jesuit hospital. In March 1949, St. Louis, Father William S. Bowdern and Father Walter Halloran began attempting an exorcism to remove the demon from the boy. The subject's demonic manifestations including having words appear on his flesh. He suffered violent gyrations. He was spinning around in the bed. During one session, he threw a punch, breaking Halloran's nose. It took 4 men to hold the boy down while the priest tried to do their thing. During moments of lucidity, the boy told the priests that he saw himself fighting a huge red demon who was all slimy and extremely powerful. The creature was attempting to prevent him from escaping from a fiery pit. Mid-April, the priests and their assistants were in the middle of the rites of exorcism when suddenly the boy stopped struggling and he said, "He's gone." The priests stopped what they were doing and they looked around the room trying to think where he might have gotten to. Father Bowdern told everybody in the room to remove all of their vestments, their holy religious objects. They took the boy out of the room and they left everything behind: Bibles, robes, crosses, everything not attached to them was left in their hasty escape from whatever had been inside the boy. The room, as well as the hallway just outside, were declared off limits to everyone. The boy was returned to his family, and there's no report of what they ever did with the Ouija board. As far as any reports are concerned, he went on to lead a normal life. I met a couple of medics one time who used to work at the St. Louis Catholic Hospital. They worked in the newer parts of the hospital, but it was a common practice for new students and new employees to slip into the older parts of the hospital, the part that was run by the Jesuits back in the day. Uh, they would make forays upstairs just to look down the hallway at the room where things happened. The rooms on the old fourth floor were kept up, except for that one hall on the other side of the building. You could tell that something was wrong by the amount of dust on the floor. The janitors would sweep and mop only as far as the handles would reach without setting foot in the hallway in front of that room. As lights would burn out, they were never replaced. This gave the hallway a far more sinister look and feel. The staff would tell stories on how back 1949 an actual exorcism had taken place, and it was right there in that room. Years later, the building had served as many people as it could. The old hospital was being torn down to make way for a newer, bigger, fancier facility. A crew went through looking for anything of value or that might be dangerous when tearing down a building. In that one room, they found all of the things, including a diary written by one of the priests. All the priests' robes, their crosses, their Bibles, everything was there. The diary was used by Blady to get his ideas for the book The Exorcist. The demolition crew arrived and they began taking the building down. They used one of those giant wrecking balls that would swing out and then crash into the side of the bricks. As the ball would hit, broken bricks and mortar would fall to the ground. It was quite something to see, and a lot of people showed up to watch the old building as it was knocked down. As the wrecking ball lined up with one of the rooms, it would grow quiet. Everybody knew the stories of what had taken place right there many years ago. The ball swung out, and then it hit the side of the building. People watching said that as the bricks and the mortar rained down to the ground, they saw a huge black animal. It looked like a giant black cat of some kind, jumped from the hole, and it dropped down towards the ground. About 10 or 15 feet from the ground, it simply vanished. I'll leave you to decide what jumped out of that wall. Or was everybody watching it just confused and seeing things? Bowdern, who died in 1983, never publicly spoke about his role in the exorcism. Halloran, who subsequently served as a paratrooper chaplain during the Vietnam War, won 2 Bronze Stars for heroism. He did eventually talk about what happened back in 1949. There are lots of other stories of bizarre things coming about during or right after using a Ouija board. The usual way to use a Ouija board is for two people to place their fingers on opposite sides of the planchette and then let things go where they may. A young girl was using a talking board by herself. She asked a bunch of the usual questions, but there was no response. The planchette just sat there. After growing frustrated by this lack of activity, she gave up and was about to go do something else when the planchette began to slide back and forth on its own. She was too afraid to try following the movement to see what was being spelled out. Instead, she left the room, returning hours later just to put the board away and never look at it again. I meet a lot of people with strange stories. I go looking for them, literally. The following story came to me from Blanca. This is how she told the story to me. This is how I wrote it in my book, so I'll just read her words the way she said them. Around 1978 or 1980, if you want, in the back of your mind, picture my voice as being that of a female instead of a guy. Blanca, and that's a lady. Around 1978, 1980, when I was 14 years old, my sister Janie, who is no longer with us, and I started using the Ouija board. The spirit that always used to talk to us was a woman named Rosa Perez. Each time we used the board, she was the spirit that came through. Rosa didn't like me for some reason. I don't know why. It was always the same. She would talk to my sister, telling her how much she liked her, but when it was my turn, she would cuss me out. We used the Ouija board almost every day. All of a sudden, Rosa, the spirit, began telling us that she wanted to send a message to her family. The message was to tell her family that she was doing okay and not to worry about her. I asked, "How am I going to find your family and then tell them, oh, by the way, Rosa sent me to tell you that she's doing okay?" Rosa got mad at me and started cussing me out. Once all the nastiness was over, we were able to ask Rosa where she was from and how she had died. She told us she was from Nuevo Laredo, but she didn't tell how she had died. I'll never forget what she said next. It gives me chills just thinking about it. Rosa said, "I'll tell you where I'm buried. I am buried in the same cemetery as your grandma. I'll give you directions so you can verify that I am telling the truth." Blanca was ready with a pen and paper to write her directions. Rosa said, "Go to your grandma's grave, and from there go so many tombs to the left. Turn south and go so many tombs to the left again, and you will see me." I was thinking, okay, I go to Nuevo Laredo a lot, and I would stay at my aunt's house. My aunt lived about a mile and a half from the cemetery. So one day while I was in Mexico visiting her, I decided to try to find Rosa's grave. I had the notes that my sister and I had written out using the Ouija board, and I asked my 10-year-old cousin Patricia if she would like to go with me. It was still early, and I thought we would be back home long before sundown. We set out for the cemetery. We knew where our grandmother was buried, so we walked straight to her grave marker. Her grave was all the way in the back part of the cemetery. When we found it, I said a prayer and then I told my cousin to wait right there. I would be back in a few minutes. I started counting graves to the left and then I turned south as Rosa had said. I counted the tombstones moving along the graves until I came to a broken cross. The stone was colored blue and it had a name carved into it. I looked closely at the name and I saw it said Rosa Perez, just as the Spirit had told us. Even knowing who I was looking for, seeing the name made all the blood drain into my feet. I felt a chill run through me as if a cold wind was blowing from the north. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I hadn't walked very far from my cousin, so I called to her and said it was time to leave. I was so scared I could barely move. It's one thing to think you have a conversation with the dead, but to have it carved in stone makes it so much more real. As we were walking out of the cemetery, all we needed to do was just go straight to the gate. We began walking, moving past all of the grave markers. We walked along for way too long. It was as if the longer we walked, the farther the gate was from us. I could see the cemetery gate, but it wasn't getting any closer no matter how long we walked. The journey out of the cemetery took far longer than it could possibly have taken. It was as if we were walking in circles while moving in a straight line. We finally found ourselves on the sidewalk outside of the graveyard. Patricia asked if I had found what I was looking for, and I told her yes, the person was there. Once back to the home in Laredo, my sister asked if I had found Rosa's grave. I told her I had, and then I tried to describe how weird this cemetery had become when we tried to leave. I said the place became very creepy when I found Rosa Perez's grave. Janie asked me what we should do next. I said, let's contact Rosa. We got the Ouija board out and we tried to contact her. Things didn't go the way we'd hoped. Rosa became mad at us for not contacting her family. We tried to explain we didn't have their address or even a phone number. Rosa only went on a tantrum, saying she was now going to haunt us, hanging out in the back of our house and scaring us any time we went outside. After being threatened by Rosa, any time we tried using the Ouija board, we would only get one name, Beelzebub, which is Spanish for Beelzebub, or the devil. This was the most frightening thing we could read, so we stopped using the talking board after that. Another person I interviewed gave me this next story. Harmon was staying with her dad for the weekend. Since the separation, the kids were alternating staying with their mother or father. When the air conditioning in the bedroom stopped working, Carmen and her dad wound up sleeping on a pair of beds in the living room. She was on one side of the room and he on the other. It was preferable over having to try to sleep in a hot bedroom. In the middle of the night, Carmen woke and looked around the room. Something had disturbed her. Looking into the kitchen, she saw a shadow. It was dark, shaped kind of like a man, but there were no details. Just a black shape where there should be nothing. She froze in fright watching this black thing standing there, wondering if it was going to attack. In the blink of an eye, the shadow being vanished. 1 second it was there, the next nothing. It took a long time before Carmen could get back to sleep. The following night, Carmen woke at about the same time and once more looked towards the kitchen. The shadow being was back, only now it was closer to where her dad was sleeping. After way too long, the shadow vanished, once more leaving only questions. When Carmen told her brother about seeing the shadow being while at their dad's house, Arturo had to admit he had seen it as well. His sightings had been during the daytime. The shadow was usually at the edge of Arturo's vision. He had written it off as being just an illusion. Now he was having second thoughts. The two decided it was best to let their mother know about what they were seeing. As Carmen was telling their mother about her sightings, the mother asked if there was any place at their dad's house where things felt especially bad. Carmen said it was mostly while in their old bedroom. In their bedroom was a talking pillow that had been given to them by a family friend. This friend of the family had given them a talking pillow some time ago. The pillow had a button that, when pressed, A Bible verse was read out from a recording. There was something wrong with the recording because when the button was pressed, the recording sounded extremely creepy, as if something out of a horror movie. The voice was so upsetting that nobody ever pushed the button. Odd things still happened because the recording would go off by itself, and sometimes at the weirdest times, like in the middle of the night when nobody had pushed the button, and the voice was extremely creepy. Their mother told them that the family, the friend who had given them the pillow, had used a Ouija board a lot, like every day. And this had led to some very paranormal activity inside their home. They talked about it and they decided it was best to get rid of this pillow. The next time they were with their dad, they told him about what had been seen. He grabbed the pillow and threw it in the trash. Once it was out of the house, the shadow beings stopped appearing. Now, could something have gone from the Ouija board to the pillow? Be careful when you accept gifts from strange friends and relatives. When Vince was a child, one of his friends goaded him into playing with a Ouija board in the basement. Vince didn't expect anything out of the ordinary to happen, so he went along with it. Once they started to play, the lights began to flicker. The air grew cold, and a spirit began communicating with them through the board. The spirit spelled out a Russian name and claimed that he had been murdered a long time ago. After using the board for several hours, they took a break to make something to eat. They all tromped upstairs, never bothering to close the session. They had some snacks and then headed back down. The energy in the room felt extremely heavy. The room was a mess. Things had been thrown around. Books were off of the shelves, laying on the floor. The couch's cushions were scattered about. The only thing not messed with was the talking board. It was right where they had left it, the planchette sitting right in the middle. As the kids were looking around the room at the mess, somebody caught the image of the talking board reflected in a mirror. The eyes on the board were moving back and forth. This got everybody running back upstairs, leaving the mess and the talking board for somebody else to deal with later. Juan's aunt lived in Nuevo Laredo, right across from the HEB on Highway 83 South. The neighborhood is called Viveros. She was very much into Ouija boards. She had a problem with bulimia as well, and she was constantly in and out of the hospital. The aunt was obsessed with Juan's mother, calling her all the time, asking her to come fix whatever problem she was dealing with. Being a concerned sister, his mother was spending a lot of time on the other side of the river. Juan would go with her and always seemed to be displeasing to his aunt. She would hug her sister, but she would only give her nephew a hostile look. It got to a point that Juan's father said, "No more trips to Mexico." Late one night, Juan got home at about 3 in the morning. As he walked across the room heading to his bedroom, he heard a scream. He peeked into his parents' room, and there was his mother levitating above the bed. She was thrashing around, making a god awful sound, hanging in midair. Juan's father was asleep next to her, unable to hear what was going on. Juan was in a panic. What could he do? He carefully placed one hand on his mother's arm. With the touch, she fell back onto the bed as if nothing had happened. This was just one more reason he wanted to stop visiting his aunt. Juan's aunt got so bad it was decided that she needed help, as she was going to be placed in a hospital for medical treatment. Juan and his mother drove over to transport his aunt to the hospital and get her admitted. Once in the parking lot, his aunt needed a wheelchair to get her in the door. As his mother was pushing the chair, Juan walked along slightly behind. The aunt was jerking and twitching up and down until she made contact with him. His aunt smiled at him, making Juan's skin crawl. He said it was not a pleasant smile. When his aunt was finally released from the hospital, Juan and his mother drove over to help her get settled back into her home. The house was a mess. The kitchen was filled with bugs. There were maggots and roaches everywhere. While his mother was in the kitchen trying to get the mess under control, Juan stayed in the living room. His aunt acted as if he were not there. If she did acknowledge him, it was just a one or two word answer. When her sister tried to enter the bedroom to fix it up, the aunt ran and stopped her. Was there something in there that she just didn't want her to see? Juan never did find out. When it was time to leave, suddenly the aunt was all friendly. She tried giving Juan a whole bunch of little trinkets, things to take with him. Well, he declined these gifts, thinking there might be something attached to them. Remember what I said, avoid accepting gifts from friends and family that are weird. His aunt still lives in Nuevo Laredo and still trying to get her sister to come over and fix every problem that she has. As far as Juan knows, she's still playing with her Ouija board. A couple of sisters used to mess around with the Ouija board a few times when they were teenagers. Every time they used the board, they thought they were communicating with the same spirit, someone named Ed, who would begin threatening their younger brother, which kind of upset the two sisters. The younger brother wasn't even in the room, but the spirit of Ed would say disparaging things about him, and it would say it was going to do some bad things to him. Enough was enough, so the sisters threw the talking board away. The threats were never mentioned. A few years later, the younger brother brought home a friend who brought his Ouija board along with him. And they were going to go in the bedroom and play. After he and his friend used the board a few times, they grew frustrated by what they were being told. The young brother told his sisters that a spirit named Ed kept threatening him. The sisters took the brother along with the board to tell their mother what had happened to them and what was happening now. Their mother banned all Ouija boards from the house from then on. A bunch of 12th graders were having a get together. One of them brought a talking board along to see what they might see. Some of the girls in the group had already used the board before, and they showed the novices how to get things going. The kids would take turns sitting at the table using the planchette and asking questions. While the questions were being asked, those standing around would make jokes and comments about the board, the spirit in the board, and those using it. The planchette began moving very fast back and forth. It was nearly too fast to read the letters. The girls at the table were able to see the board spelling out things about the boys that were making rude comments. The girls at the table told the audience to shut up and just watch. A few people switched places, either to prove this was just a joke or to relieve the girls who were getting quite upset. One of the girls discovered it was necessary to leave the room to visit the facilities. She walked over to the door when the board spelled out, "Don't open that door." She froze. Everybody froze, and it got quiet. A girl who was quite scared placed a blanket over her eyes, and the board said, "Don't try to hide from me." One of the boys who was holding the planchette got so freaked out he began to cry. The girls who had used the talking board before yelled at him to not remove his fingers from the planchette until it said goodbye. The kids at the table kept asking questions until finally the device moved to goodbye and the planchette stopped moving. It's just a game, right? The entire Ouija board is cardboard sheet and a piece of plastic shaped like a heart. The talking board isn't the issue. It's what you do with it that what happens later. There's no magician standing at the end of the conveyor belt at the factory imbibing each board with a spirit. That happens when you sit down and start asking questions. You and everybody around invite something to come work through the board. This causes the problem. No matter how careful you think you are, you cannot control who or what takes possession, literally, of that board. A Bible is just a bunch of paper and ink until it gets printed out with the words of God on each page. Then it becomes something else, something holy. A Ouija board is just cardboard and plastic until you invite the spirits in. Now you have a possible cursed or possessed item in your home. Never burn a Ouija board. Don't tear it into pieces either. If you want to get rid of the thing, what you have to do is bury it. Like in the movie Jumanji, you dig a hole, you place it in the bottom of the hole, and you cover it with dirt. There are a lot of websites out there with a lot of other ways to deal with the Ouija board. They all involve passing the board on to someone else. Donate it to a charity, give it to the Goodwill, give it to somebody you don't really like a whole lot. The idea is that once the board is out of your home, the spirit will simply go away. I, for one, I would dig a hole and place it in the bottom of the hole and then cover it back up. I wouldn't do it in my own backyard either. I would go out of town somewhere. But then I'll never have that problem because I don't play with Ouija boards. If you enjoyed tonight's show, if you did, tell your friends, tell your relatives, tell people you don't even like. They should be listening to the show Strange Things with Chris James. If you're listening on YouTube and you want to hear just my voice because you're tired of looking at me, you can find me on iHeartRadio in the podcast section. If you want to stare at me when I'm talking, well, YouTube is the way to do it. If you'd like to buy a shirt, not necessarily this one, but a Strange Things t-shirt, you can find them at tpublic.com. If you would like to read one of my books, you can either find them at the Organic Man Coffee Trike or you can get them at amazon.com. If you have a story you would like to share, something that you believe is true, it could be something you heard from your grandfather, your grandmother, your parents, your next door neighbor. As long as you're pretty much certain that it's a true story, send it to me and I will put it in my next book. You can contact me at strangethings@arkanasa.com. Also, if there's something you'd like to hear in a show, you can contact me there as well. Till next Saturday, this is Chris James for Strange Things. Should hum the music or something, but not going to.